I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons, my Bibliospran, Bibliohowlers, and Bibliomancers. Thank you so much for supporting my hobby and passion even more. It means so much to me. Hi everyone, Petrik here. Today's video will be a recommendation video. So for the past 2 years on my booktube channel, many of you have asked me for this kind of video. So basically this is where I will say if you like a particular series, then you should try reading these books or this series. And yeah, even though for the past 2 years many of you have asked me to do this kind of video, I still haven't made it. And now today I want to make the first installment in this series of videos. And to begin this series of videos, I'm going to choose The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. The Faithful and the Fallen is one of my top favorite series of all time, especially when accompanied with its sequel trilogy of Blood and Bone trilogy. And I'm going to assume that if you're subscribed to my channel, I think many of you know already that I am a huge fan of the Banished Land saga, which consists, as I said, The Faithful and the Fallen and also of Blood and Bone trilogy. So The Faithful and the Fallen consists of 4 books: Malice, Valor, Ruin, and Breath. Yeah, these 4 books are The Faithful and the Fallen quartet. The sequel trilogy consists of A Time of Dread, A Time of Blood, and also A Time of Courage. I highly recommend you to read this entire series if you haven't read it. I think it is absolutely amazing. It is still one of the best series that I've read to this date. And because some of you who are watching this video right now or maybe subscribe to my channel are interested in reading books that you think you will love if you love The Faithful and the Fallen, well, today's video will be my recommendation. And today I will give you 6 recommendations. 6 books or series that I think you will love if you love The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. And I just want to make it clear first that this is just my recommendation based on my experience, and none of these series are completely similar to The Faithful and the Fallen. But I think if you love The Faithful and the Fallen series, these recommendations that I'm going to give you contain elements from this series. The next 6 series that I'm going to recommend to you contain elements from The Faithful and the Fallen that I think you will love as well. So I'm going to try to explain and recommend to you as efficiently as possible why I think you will love this series and why this series could work for you like me, who love The Faithful and the Fallen and the entire Banished Land saga by John Gwynne. And the first one I'm going to recommend to you is The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. This is the first book in the Darkwater Legacy series. And when we're talking about The Faithful and the Fallen, I think one of the most evident things about this series is that it is a classic fantasy. It utilizes many classic fantasy tropes, but it is written in a modern way. I personally am a fan of this kind of fantasy series. I think classic fantasy tropes, as long that it is written in a modern way, could work wonderfully, and The Faithful and the Fallen is a great example of that. And that's why I'm going to recommend to you The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. Chris Wooding, similar to The Faithful and the Fallen, utilized many classic fantasy tropes, but Chris Wooding put a modern twist to the Ember Blade. And another thing that I really love about The Faithful and the Fallen, or the entire Banished Land really, is the way John Gwynne writes characters. I think the characterizations in John Gwynne's books are absolutely excellent. All the characters in The Faithful and the Fallen, like Korban, Makin, Gar, Storm, all of them have become like real friends to me. And this kind of level of characterizations is really, well, it's really rare. But Chris Wooding achieved that level of characterization as well in The Ember Blade. Honestly, its sequel, The Shadow Casket, due to be released next year, is one of my most anticipated books of 2023. So I think if you love the way John Gwynne writes characters in The Faithful and the Fallen, and also you love the way the classic fantasy trope is being used and being written, I think you will love The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. And speaking of utilizing classic fantasy tropes, the next recommendation, if you love The Faithful and the Fallen, I think you will love The 5 Warrior Angels by Brian Lee Durfee, which I consider to be one of the most underrated and underhyped series to this date. It is just insane how underrated this series is. And the final book, The Lonesome Crown, is being released at the end of this month, and I cannot wait for it. I'm so looking forward to reading this book. I'm so looking forward to reading the conclusion to this series. But again, if you love The Faithful and the Fallen, I think there's a good chance that you will love The 5 Warrior Angel series by Brian Lee Durfee, especially if you love the way John Gwynne writes about prophecies in his books. So I know that many fantasy readers right now are kinda tired of prophecies in the epic fantasy genre, but personally, I am a fan of prophecies prophecies in fantasy, I think there is a lot of way that the prophecy trope can be used to actually increase the stakes and tension of the narrative, and that has been established in The Faithful and the Fallen, and even more so in the 5 Warrior Angel series. Seriously, the way Brian Lee Durfee writes about prophecies in the 5 Warrior Angel series is incredible. It makes the story more unpredictable. To this day, I still don't know about a lot of things in the series, even though I've read in details the prophecies being mentioned in the epigraphs and the texts and the narrative of the 5 Warrior Angels. There is still so many unpredictable things. I think it is incredible. And also, if you love the massive war battles in The Faithful and the Fallen, well, you will get one in The Blackest Heart, and I think it was amazing. The battle scenes in The Blackest Heart was so good, and yeah, it is kinda reminiscent of the way John Gwynne writes battle scenes. But do note that The Faithful and the Fallen features so much more battle scenes compared to the 5 Warrior Angels. 5 Warrior Angels is more focused on the prophecies, and also it's darker. It is, well, I think it belongs to the grimdark subgenre, really. Unlike The Faithful and the Fallen, which definitely doesn't belong in the grimdark genre, in my opinion. It doesn't. But yeah, I think it is safe to say that if you love The Faithful and the Fallen, I think there's a good chance that you will love the 5 Warrior Angels as well. I remember reading The Forgetting Moon for the first time, and then I kept on thinking that this actually reminded me of Malice. Like, many sections reminded me of Malice, and I think that is a good thing. For the next recommendation, if you love The Faithful and the Fallen, then I recommend you to check out The Bound and the Broken series by Ryan Cahill. It consists of The Fall, of Blood and Fire, of Darkness and Light, The Exile, and finally, the newest book to be released soon, of War and Ruin. The Bound and the Broken is becoming a massive series, and yeah, this is kinda similar to The Faithful and the Fallen in plenty of ways. For example, the first book of Blood and Fire combined many elements from classic fantasy tropes, again written in a modern fashion. And not gonna lie, out of all the recommendations I'm giving you today, as far as writing goes, I think Ryan Cahill is the one that is very similar in style to John Gwynne. Now, Ryan Cahill has mentioned many times that John Gwynne is one of his main inspiration when it comes to writing fantasy books. And I think if you have read the Banished Land saga and then you read The Bound and the Broken, you will notice a lot of similarities between their writing style. And I think it is awesome because I love John Gwynne's prose and I love Ryan Cahill's prose, especially starting from the second novel in the main series of Darkness and Light. I think reading that book is where I started to really feel like, wow, this guy Ryan Cahill is certainly inspired by John Gwynne, especially when he's writing his battle scenes. And for those of you who haven't read The Bound and the Broken yet, I highly recommend this series. This series is starting to become one of my favorite ongoing series now, and I think after reading the upcoming third book in the series, of War and Ruin, which I haven't read because it's not finished yet, but I think after reading that one, I have a good feeling that my ranking for The Bound and the Broken will only increase. If you're active in reading self-published fantasy books, great self-published fantasy books, I think you will have heard about The Bound and the Broken series, and if you haven't, well, give it a try, especially if you love The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. Moving on to the next recommendation, I think if you love The Faithful and the Fallen, you will love reading The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. So I will elaborate more on this. Now, The Realm of the Elderlings and also The Faithful and the Fallen is a completely different kind of series. I mean, the way Robin Hobb writes in particular is just vastly different compared to John Gwynne. John Gwynne is more accessible and Robin Hobb is more lyrical, it's more beautiful. But yeah, they're completely different kind of writer. But one of the most important things, one of the things that I love most about The Faithful and the Fallen and also pretty much all of John Gwynne's books is the animal companion. The bond between humans and animals that John Gwynne put into his books are some of the best that I've read in fantasy, and the same kind of praise can be applied to Robin Hobb's books, especially the one that centers around Fitz, starting from Assassin's Apprentice, Royal Assassin, Assassin's Quest, and then Tawny Man Trilogy, and finally the Fitz and the Fool Trilogy. So in the realm of the Elderlings, the bond between humans and animals are something really precious, and that's also the same in The Faithful and the Fallen. I mean, just to mention one from The Faithful and the Fallen, Korban and Storm, of course. And then of course we have Fitz and Night Eyes in the realm of the Elderlings. So yeah, if you love that kind of animal companionship, the bond between human and animal, I think there's a good chance that you will love the realm of the Elderlings as well. Plus, the entirety of the realm of the Elderlings is one of my top favorite series of all time as well, just like the Banished Land saga. And speaking of animal companion, I'm going to move on to the next recommendation now, because this one can be applied here as well, and that is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. I know that Song of Ice and Fire is grimdark. It is also one of my top favorite series. Yes, this is a grimdark fantasy series, a much more grittier and morally grey epic fantasy series compared to The Faithful and the Fallen, where we immediately kinda know who's the good guy and the bad guy. But I think beyond the animal companion, like as I said, Corbin and Storm, and then Jon Snow and Ghost, there are still many elements in A Song of Ice and Fire that I think readers will love if you love The Faithful and the Fallen. I mean, when I first read The Faithful and the Fallen, I kept on thinking of A Song of Ice and Fire due to a few things. For example, when I first started reading Malice, the first half was not easy for me. There were many houses, there were many characters' names, there were many POVs, and that also similar to the first time I tried reading A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin. Both of these epic fantasy series are in a way different and also similar in plenty of ways. Just to give a few examples here, the politics, the world building, especially the world building, and the plotting in A Song of Ice and Fire, in my opinion, is better than The Faithful and the Fallen. For characterizations, I think they're more or less equal. John Gwynne writes more endearing characters, and George R. R. Martin tend to write more complex and morally grey characters. I think both of them are excellent at characterizations for their own series, but when it comes to battle scenes, I think John Gwynne top over George R. R. Martin in so many levels, in my opinion. John Gwynne, for me, is one of the best combat scenes writer in fantasy, and I think it really shows immediately from The Faithful and the Fallen. However, there is indeed one element that John Gwynne applied to his books, and I think this is something that he learned from George R. R. Martin in A Song of Ice and Fire, and that is the bravery to actually kill off his main characters. I personally love when an author is brave enough to do this, especially when they do this and they still could make the story work. I think an author has to be very good at characterizations for many of their characters in order to be able to kill off their characters. I mean, if you have killed off all the readers' favorite characters, then, well, readers might end up losing motivation to continue because all their favorite characters are gone. And I think that's why it is very important for these kind of authors to be excellent at characterizations. And fortunately, both John Gwynne and George Martin are tremendous at characterizations. And because they are brave enough to kill off their pivotal characters and still make the story engaging, it makes the story so much more intense for both of these series. So yeah, if you love the Banished Land Saga, I think there's a good chance you will love A Song of Ice and Fire as well. So my last recommendation is for a historical fiction. Now, I have talked about battle scenes plenty of times here, and John Gwynne himself has mentioned that Bernard Cornwell is one of his favorite authors of all time. And the first time I finished The Faithful and the Fallen, I remember that I interviewed John Gwynne asking for just one series that he will recommend to any reader, and he chose The Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell. And after reading that amazing Arthurian retelling trilogy, I can certainly see why. Both John Gwynne and even George Martin has mentioned that Bernard Cornwell is most likely the best author when it comes to writing battle scenes. Although in my opinion, John Gwynne is still better at Bernard Cornwell, but I also cannot deny that Bernard Cornwell is one of the best when it comes to writing battle scenes. And one of the most iconic scenes in The Faithful and the Fallen is the duel scene that happened in Ruin. That's all I would say on this. And that kind of iconic duel scene also appeared in the Warlord Chronicles in the final book, Excalibur. And it's not only that, one of the things that I think many readers will agree with me here, if they have read both The Faithful and the Fallen and also the Warlord Chronicles, is that John Gwynne, for example, write both lovable and hateable characters. Bernard Cornwell also did the same thing, especially with Lancelot in Warlord Chronicles. Bernard Cornwell's interpretation of Lancelot is one of the most memorable and also one of the most despicable version of Lancelot that I have ever read. And well, there are plenty of characters in John Gwynne's books here that are very reminiscent of Lancelot in Warlord Chronicles. So yes, I think if you love The Faithful and the Fallen, I think there's a good chance you will love the Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell as well. And yes, this is indeed one of my favorite trilogies of all time. So that's pretty much my 6 recommendations for you who love The Faithful and the Fallen. I think there's a really high chance you will love this 6 series if you love The Faithful and the Fallen. But as a bonus, I'm going to mention 2 series, but do note that I haven't read them. This is just based on what I've heard. The first one is David Gemmell's fantasy books. I've read only the Troy trilogy, so I cannot say anything regarding his fantasy books, but many John Gwynne's fans agreed that if you love John Gwynne's books, you will love David Gemmell's fantasy books. And that's also a reminder that I will have to read more of David Gemmell's books one day. And the other honorable mention is a book that I've tried before but I haven't finished, and that is Paradise Lost by John Milton. I think even though I haven't finished Paradise Lost yet, I think if you have read even just Malice, I think you will notice that there is a lot of inspirations taken from Paradise Lost by John Milton. I mean, even the premise of Paradise Lost itself is already so reminiscent of The Faithful and the Fallen. So in Paradise Lost, God and Satan fight a bitter battle for control of mankind's destiny. And this battle rages across heaven, earth, and hell. Satan and his band of rebellious angels are plotting their revenge against God, and of course humanity are caught in the middle of these conflicts. And that is also similar to The Faithful and the Fallen, because the Ben Elim, the Kadoshim, and of course in the middle of these conflicts we have Korban and the gang, the human side. But of course, I haven't finished reading Paradise Lost yet. Even though Paradise Lost is one of the main inspirations behind The Faithful and the Fallen, I still cannot gauge, because I haven't finished Paradise Lost yet. I cannot gauge whether readers will actually love Paradise Lost or not. But I think it is worth taking a look. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of this video. Do let me know whether you love The Faithful and the Fallen or not, and do let me know whether you've read any of my recommendations. And of course, if you only finish The Faithful and the Fallen, you should read Of Blood and Bone trilogy, which is the continuation trilogy to The Faithful and the Fallen, and of course read Bloodstone Saga by John Gwynne as well. I mean, it goes without a doubt, right, that if you love The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, you will most likely love John Gwynne's other books. So yeah, I think that's it for me today. If you want more recommendations like this for any other series, do let me know in the comment section. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting me.